My daughter told me not to come for Christmas, saying she needed space with her in-laws. The words cut deep after I had spent $60,000 a year on her college, $45,000 on her wedding, and $80,000 for her home. 30 years of sacrifice turned into silence. But she didn't know I had just purchased a $2.7 million villa. That night, everything changed. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in the living room of my old apartment, the late afternoon light cutting through the blinds in golden stripes across the floor. A half-finished cup of coffee rested on the table, the steam long gone cold. My eyes drifted, not to the window, but to the framed photo above the mantel. It was from a Christmas years ago before everything broke. My daughter had been laughing, her arms wrapped around her mother, and my own smile stretched so wide it almost didn't look like me. That night we had all been together, unbroken, and the house had been filled with the smell of roasted turkey, pine needles, and laughter. I stared at that picture until my chest felt tight. Now she was telling me not to come at all, to stay away. And the words hit harder than any silence I'd ever known. The memories flooded back, and with them came the receipts, the numbers, the sacrifices etched into my bones. I could still see myself sitting at my desk, pen in hand, signing off tuition checks year after year, $60,000 each year, 4 years, sometimes 5, when she decided psychology wasn't for her, then communications, then business. Each time she switched majors, the bill remained mine, $240,000 in total, maybe more with the extras, and I never complained. I told myself I was investing in her future, in her stability. Then came the wedding, $45,000 from my account, just like that, so she could wear a dress that cost more than most cars I'd ever owned. I remember standing in the reception hall, watching her spin in that gown while the chandeliers caught the light, and telling myself this was worth every penny. I even bought her husband a $22,000 car when he lost his job, just so they wouldn't feel stranded. The memory of their grateful smiles was supposed to make it easier. But tonight, all I could think about was how cheap those smiles really were, how quickly they faded once the engine started. And then the house that was supposed to be their new beginning. I remember Brianna calling me, her voice so full of excitement, telling me they had found the perfect place in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where children would play in backyards and neighbors waved over fences. They needed a down payment, she said, and they had already stretched themselves thin. I wired $80,000 that same week. I told myself it was for the grandchildren I might one day hold, for the family dinners I imagined around their table. But the truth is, those dinners never came. The grandchildren never arrived. And the house I had helped secure had become a fortress that now shut me out. I had given them the walls, but I wasn't welcome inside. That house had turned into a symbol of everything I had poured out for them and everything I was denied in return. The betrayal cut deeper than money. It was the silence. The kind of silence where the only time my phone buzzed was when they needed something, a bill, a loan, a favor. Not once did she call to ask if I was healthy, if I was lonely, if I was simply alive. Not once. I sat there, the photo of Christmas long past staring at me, and whispered into the empty room, "Mary, do you see this? Do you see what our little girl has become? We raised her with love, with sacrifice, but to her, I'm just a bank account, nothing more, a wallet with a heartbeat." My voice cracked on the last words. Speaking her name after so many years without her brought tears that blurred the picture frame. Mary would have known what to say. She always did. Without her, all I had was the echo of my own disappointment. For a long time, I stayed in that chair, trapped between heartbreak and disbelief, until the grief began to harden into something else. Anger. The shock that had knocked the air out of me started to transform. I replayed every request, every manipulation, every time I said yes when my gut told me to say no. 30 years of bending over backwards, of never setting boundaries, of letting my own life shrink so theirs could expand. It was like staring at a ledger where the balance had always been in their favor. I had been more than generous. I had been complicit. My silence, my willingness to always give, had built this monster of entitlement, and the realization stung worse than her text. Slowly I stood, the floor creaking beneath me. My knees ached, but there was a new strength behind them. I walked to the small safe tucked behind the bookshelf and turned the combination lock with steady hands. Inside were the papers they knew nothing about, the investments I had made when everyone said I was reckless. The cryptocurrency portfolio, ignored by most, had turned into hundreds of thousands. The tech startups I had believed in, laughed at by others, had rewarded me tenfold. My consulting business, which they assumed was just a hobby, had become the quiet machine that kept paying out long after retirement age. I pulled out the manila folders and laid them across the desk, the numbers bold and undeniable. My wealth was not theirs. It was mine, more than they had ever imagined, and more than I had ever revealed. As I looked over the documents, something clicked inside me. For so long I had believed the narrative they fed me, that I was old, that I should be grateful to be included, that my role was to support them quietly in the background. But the truth was, I still held the power. I wasn't weak. I wasn't irrelevant. I had the means, the resources, and the knowledge to shape my own story. Their betrayal had hurt, but it had also opened my eyes. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight shift. I wasn't powerless. I was free. The papers rustled as I slid them back into the safe. My reflection in the glass of the bookcase looked different, sharper somehow, like a man who had been asleep for too long and was finally waking up. I whispered again, but this time not to Mary, not to the ghosts of what I had lost. I whispered to myself, I won't sit here and take this anymore. They think they've written the ending, but they're wrong. This story isn't over. When I closed the safe and heard the lock click, I knew it wasn't just a door shutting. It was something larger. It was the sound of me drawing a line. A small decision, maybe, but one that carried the weight of a lifetime. I would no longer be silent. I would no longer accept being treated as an afterthought, or worse, an open wallet. The path forward was still unclear, but the decision had been made. I straightened my back, wiped my eyes, and looked again at the photo above the mantel. The smiling faces of Christmas past didn't bring me pain this time. They brought me resolve. Whatever came next, I would be ready. I woke before sunrise and brewed coffee the way Mary liked it, strong and plain with a touch of cream. The apartment felt smaller than it had the night before, not because the walls moved, but because my resolve had finally stood up and stretched. I carried the mug to the mantel and stared at the Christmas photo where we were all younger, bright, and together. I spoke into the quiet room so I could hear the truth in my own voice. I am not going to sit here and take this anymore. The words steadied me. I carried the cup to the window and watched the first cars pull through the intersection, headlights low and patient, the world waking slow. The radiator clicked and hissed. The old clock on the bookshelf ticked with that soft wooden sound that never changes. I remembered Mary's habit of running a finger around the rim of her mug while she listened. She would let me talk myself into courage without ever telling me what to do. I could almost hear her. Do the next right thing, David. One step, then another. I finished the mug, put on my coat, and started turning thought into motion. I called my brother first. Robert answered on the second ring with that rough morning voice I have known my whole life. When I told him I was hosting Christmas, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, he laughed softly and said it was about time. He asked where. I told him about the villa I had closed on last month for $2.7 million, tucked behind a row of young oaks with a curved drive and a tall front door. He whistled and promised to be there early with Sarah. Hearing his easy approval made the old fear that I was making too much of this begin to slip away. He reminded me of the year he moved my couch with a bad back because I was trying to do it alone. He reminded me of the time I loaned him a truck and never asked for the gas money back. Brothers keep score differently. He said Sarah would bring a green bean casserole that could convert a skeptic. He asked what he could pick up. Ice, I told him. And himself? He laughed again. That laugh cleared a path in my chest. Before we hung up, he said something I did not know I needed to hear. We're coming because we want to, not because we owe you. I opened a yellow legal pad and made a list. Guests first: Robert and Sarah, Tom and Linda Richardson, Mark and Sarah Henderson, Patricia Webb, James Reed, if he had flown back from Phoenix. Maybe Ruth from my old street, the neighbor who brought casseroles when Mary was sick. 10 people would be perfect around that table. Under the names, I wrote the menu. I could cook, but I wanted to be present. I called Morton's and ordered 2 prime ribs, trimmed and seasoned, with delivery tomorrow at 5:30 sharp. I asked for instructions just in case I needed to finish them in my own oven. I added roasted vegetables and twice-baked potatoes, and I asked for a Caesar salad that tastes like salt and bite and winter. I called the wine shop and reserved a case of a good Napa Cabernet from 2018, a vintage that wears a suit without showing off. I added a few bottles of sparkling water because some of my friends drink bubbles now instead of beer. One by one, I called each guest to ask, not assume. Conversation by conversation, I felt myself return to the life of a man who extends invitations because he means them. Each call stitched a small seam in the new fabric of my life. By 8:30, I was driving toward the villa. Winter light lay clean across the hood. When the gate opened, I felt the small thrill I had felt the first day the keys were mine. Inside, the foyer rose 2 stories to a chandelier that scattered light in bright coins across the floor. The living room opened into a chef's kitchen with double ovens and a stone island wide enough for a feast. Beyond the glass, the lawn rolled down to a line of hedges. I walked room to room, touching surfaces the way you touch the arm of an old friend to be sure the friendship is real. The house did not feel like a trophy. It felt like a well-made tool, a place that could hold family without asking me to vanish. I opened the doors to the terrace and stepped out. The air was crisp and clean. A few leaves scratched along the stone like small animals practicing. I could see the neighborhood beyond the hedges, holiday lights winking here and there. Somewhere, a dog barked and then thought better of it. I closed the doors and stood for a moment with my hands on the cool glass, thinking how Mary would have liked the way the morning spilled into this place. I pulled 9 extra chairs from storage and polished them until the rag came away gray and the wood shone softly. I counted the white plates with the thin silver rim. I opened the velvet wrap that held the family silver Mary's mother gave us the year we married. One by one, I placed knives and forks in pairs, my hands moving slowly, with the kind of reverence that sometimes feels like prayer. I laid a cream table runner down the center and set out glass votives for candles. From the pantry, I brought out serving dishes and set them near the stovetop. I turned on the stereo and found Nat King Cole, the voice of another era, drawing a straight line through my chest. Around noon, my phone buzzed on the counter. I wiped my hands and looked at the screen, expecting a delivery update. It was a text from Brianna. "Dad, since you're not joining us this Christmas, could you transfer $5,000? We're finishing the basement. The contractor wants to pour before New Year's." I read it a second time, then a third, until the politeness fell off and the meaning stood there plain. No apology, no invitation, not a word about how I was doing. It was a bill that expected payment on the strength of my last name. I felt the heat rise behind my eyes. Then I felt it pass. My breath slowed. The house did not shrink around me. It held. I poured another cup of coffee and stood at the window, looking at the camellias the landscaper had planted along the walk. Tight red buds pressed against the cold like small fists refusing to unclench. Last year, I would have reached for my checkbook and my car keys. Today, I reached for my power. I scrolled to my attorney's number, the man who handled my partnership agreements and the sale of my last startup stake. He picked up on the second ring. I told him I needed to secure my assets and tighten my plans. He said to come by later that afternoon so he could draft documents while I waited. He said we would start with the simple shields. A fresh trust with clear terms. My signature is the only key. Healthcare directives that name no child as a gatekeeper. Durable powers of attorney that could not be abused by anyone who thinks love is the same as control. He suggested moving a portion of liquid assets into the trust promptly, leaving enough for everyday life outside it so nothing looked dramatic. He mentioned a no-contest clause, not as a threat, but as a fence to discourage future trouble. He sounded calm, not surprised. He said he would have drafts ready by 4. I ended the call and dialed the bank. The private client line answered quickly. I asked for a temporary freeze on outward transfers from my savings account ending in 3491, the one with $400,000 remaining after the closing. I confirmed my address, answered verification questions, and requested that any transfer for the next 30 days require in-person identification. The banker explained the steps with professional calm. She told me the freeze would not affect automatic bill pay or deposits. She asked if I wanted an alert sent to my email and phone for any attempted transfer. I said yes. She also offered to set automatic alerts for any request over $1,000. I agreed. She walked me through the 2-factor settings and confirmed that my mobile number was the only one authorized. We added a note to the account record stating that no third-party conversations about transfers were permitted without me present. She apologized for asking so many questions. I told her I appreciated the thoroughness. When we finished, she read the changes back to me, line by line, and I felt a click inside, as if a gear had finally found its tooth. The afternoon settled into a clean rhythm. I drove to a linens shop and chose a table runner the color of winter wheat, a stack of linen napkins stitched in a tight crosshatch, and a dozen glass votives that smelled faintly of cedar and orange rind. I stopped at a florist for white lilies and bright red berries, and the young woman behind the counter tucked them into a box with a little smile that said she knew what holidays required. On the way back, I stepped into a small record store and bought a vinyl of Nat King Cole's Christmas album, the very one Mary loved. The clerk wrapped the votives in tissue and asked if I wanted matches. I bought 3 little boxes because details matter. At the florist, I asked how long the lilies would take to open, and she told me to keep them out of drafts and let them find their room. In the record shop, I ran my thumb along the edges of cardboard sleeves until I found a copy of Nat King Cole that didn't hiss too badly. I paid cash and carried the bag to the car like something living. An email from the bank arrived confirming the freeze. I printed the message, wrote the date and time in the corner, and slid it into a folder labeled Accounts. Then I drove downtown to my attorney's office, a building with polished stone floors and poinsettias gathered at the elevator. In the conference room, he laid out drafts as if he were setting a careful table. A revised will that placed modest gifts to the charities Mary loved and a scholarship in her name at the high school she attended. He asked me simple questions and listened to each answer until I finished speaking. We discussed healthcare directives and powers of attorney. I signed where he placed flags and dated each page. We reviewed beneficiary designations. I kept things simple. Friends would receive nothing more than my thanks and any leftovers from the dinner table. Family would receive respect, which is not the same as a blank check. The bulk of my assets would sit inside the trust to be used for my care while I live and then for the causes Mary believed in. He asked me a few direct questions and let the quiet do its work. We discussed healthcare directives and who would sit in a chair beside mine if hard choices came. I signed and watched the ink dry as if it were setting into steel. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. When I stepped back onto the street, the light had softened into the tender blue that makes every window glow. I drove to the villa with the signed packet on the passenger seat and felt calm where panic used to live. On the kitchen island, my phone blinked again. Another text from Brianna. Any update on the $5,000, Dad? The contractor wants to pour. She added a smiley face as if a sticker could warm a cold request. I looked at the little bubble, then at the signed documents on the counter, and I set the phone face down. I pictured Robert at the front door tomorrow with a bottle of red and that grin that invites you to forgive the world. I pictured Sarah running her palm along the millwork and saying, "This is beautiful, and you deserve it." I pictured Tom's eyebrows rising the instant he would see that my life had not been a slow decline, but a quiet climb. I pictured Patricia, quick with her camera and quicker with a hug, promising to bring her famous tiramisu. I pictured Mark and Sarah Henderson taking their usual seats and asking me about the hiking trip I still plan to take. The room filled up with people who show up because they want to, not because they expect to leave with anything heavier than a coat. I sat at the desk in the study and opened the wall safe hidden behind a row of books. Inside, the folders waited in tidy stacks: deeds, policies, brokerage accounts. I added the signed documents to a new section labeled Estate, then took out a one-page summary of assets and beneficiaries. The columns were plain, the numbers were sober, the names were mine to choose. On the top margin, I wrote, in a steady hand, "I decide." I slid the sheet back into its sleeve and closed the folder with a feeling like a door fitting its frame. The phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, I pressed play and listened to a contractor's cheerful voice asking Brianna to confirm the transfer so his crew could keep momentum through the holidays. He must have dialed me by mistake, or she had given him my number, expecting the old version of me to fall in line. I deleted the message. A simple thing. Yet it felt like stepping off a treadmill that had run under my feet for 30 years. I stood still and let the quiet reach even the corners of the house. Evening arrived clean and early. I made a simple dinner of scrambled eggs, toast, and a handful of grapes, and ate standing at the island the way teenagers do after practice. I washed the plate, dried it, and set it back in the cupboard. I turned on a few lamps, and the room shifted from day to a warm amber that made the silver look like moonlight. Through the windows, the lawn lay dark and soft, the path lights making small rings on the grass. For the first time in a long while, the future no longer looked like a hallway getting narrower. It opened. I wrote names on place cards with a felt-tip pen, pressing carefully so the letters would not feather. I paused over each card and thought about the person it stood for. Tom, who stuck by me when people said I was too old for tech. Linda, who could see foolishness in a budget from across a room. Patricia, a sparkler who also knows when to sit quietly. Mark, who checked on me the winter Mary died and never stopped. Sarah Henderson, who tells jokes that land with kindness. James Reed, whose counsel steadied me more than once. Robert and Sarah. I added a small line under each name that only I would see, a word to remember the best of them. Loyal, steady, brave, funny. I even wrote one for myself on a plain card that would sit at the head of the table. Present. I tucked the cards beneath the plate so they would not blow when someone opened a door. I stepped back and saw not just a table, but a map. Not of territory, of trust. Before bed, I walked the rooms and checked each detail. Candles waited in their glass cups. Napkins were folded into strong, simple squares. Silver lay in velvet trays, quiet and ready. The place cards fanned across the runner like small flags of belonging. I turned off the lamps and stepped into the cold night. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke from some far house. My breath rose in pale clouds. I locked the door and stood for a moment on the porch while the night accepted me. Then I drove back to the apartment. Back at the apartment, I slid the manila envelope my attorney had given me into the safe and turned the wheel until the tumblers caught and held. I set the alarm for early, flowers still to pick up, ice, fresh bread, a few small things that make a house feel like it is listening. I wrote those words on a list and left the page with my keys. Then I looked at the Christmas photo once more and let Mary's laugh run through me like warm light. It shook the loneliness without pretending it did not exist. I whispered, "We're all right, you and I. We always were when we chose to act." I turned out the lamp and slept. Dawn came thin and gray. I dressed, drove to the florist, and picked up lilies, berries, and sprigs of green that smelled like mountain air. I bought bags of ice and a loaf of bread with a crust that crackled when you pressed it. At the villa, I set the flowers in water, chilled the wine, and slid the bread into a warm oven. I put the Nat King Cole record on the turntable again and let that velvet voice settle into the corners the way it always did. Then I reviewed my folders one last time, page by page. I tucked a copy of the bank email into the accounts folder and placed a copy set into a new fireproof box I had bought that morning. I sliced the bread and tucked the pieces into a linen-lined basket so they would stay warm without sweating. I filled ice buckets and set them near the bar. I checked that the doorbell worked and that the porch light threw a friendly circle on the stoop. I placed the lilies in the tallest vase and let the berries spill a little so it would look like we had gathered them ourselves from a hedge. The room lifted as if it had taken a good breath. I signed a brief cover letter authorizing my attorney to open the trust on the first business day after Christmas and sealed it in a large envelope addressed to myself at the credit union where my safe deposit box sits behind a polite guard and a heavy door. I wrote a short instruction to the bank requesting that the transfer freeze remain in place until I appeared in person to lift it. I placed both envelopes in my leather briefcase and closed the clasps with a clean click that sounded like a gavel tapping wood. I texted my attorney that the envelope would be in the safe deposit box before noon tomorrow and asked him to email me a scanned copy for my records. He replied with a thumbs up and a line that read, "Sleep well. You did the right things today." I put the envelopes in my briefcase and set the case near the door so I would not forget it when excitement started rushing around tomorrow afternoon. On the desk, I left one more note, printed in block letters for my own eyes. They think I am weak, but they are wrong. They think I need permission, but I do not. Under that line, I wrote a sentence I wanted to remember when Noyes arrived. The game has only begun. I slid the note into the front of the estate folder, returned the stack to the safe, and turned the wheel. The lock engaged with a steady final sound. The house held the quiet like a trusted friend. I took a long breath and let anticipation arrive. Before I left the study, I opened the curtains and looked out at the dark lawn. Somewhere, a fox crossed the neighbor's yard and slipped into the hedge as if it knew a secret path. I thought about tomorrow evening, about the doorbell, the coats on the rack, the first toast. I pictured laughter spilling into the hall. I pictured my phone buzzing again and me letting it ring. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors you decide who gets to walk through. Only you. The first guest rang the bell a little before 6, and the chime rolled through the foyer like a warm note. I wiped my hands on a linen towel, opened the heavy door, and there was Robert with a grin, a bottle tucked under his arm, and Sarah behind him, carrying a casserole that steamed in the cold. He looked past me, whistled softly at the sweep of the staircase, then hugged me without a word. The hug said what his voice did not rush to say. He was proud of me. Sarah kissed my cheek and said the house smelled like courage. I took their coats, pointed them toward the living room, and felt the villa accept the sound of friendly voices the way a good piano accepts a steady hand. More cars eased into the drive. Tom and Linda came next, Tom with that half smile, Linda already tracing the ceiling trim with her eyes. Mark and Sarah Henderson arrived with a basket of bread wrapped in a kitchen towel. Patricia swept in last with her camera in her bag and a glass dish under her arm, humming a tune that sounded like anticipation. With each arrival, the rooms grew warmer. I poured wine, and the talk rose and fell like a tide. Robert lifted his glass and made a simple toast, not about money, not about the villa, but about showing up. Presence, he said, is the best gift a man can bring. The words settled over the room like slow snow. Shoulders eased, faces softened. I felt safe in my own life. Dinner moved the way good dinners move, in small tides. Coats gave way to laughter. Laughter gave way to stories. People noticed details I had chosen with a quiet hand, the wheat-colored runner, the cedar and orange votives, the lilies opening as the room warmed. Tom clapped my shoulder and said the house fit me. Linda said the house looked like a decision. Patricia slipped her phone out, snapped a few candid photos, and asked if she could post them. "Go ahead," I told her. "Let the light in." She smiled and typed with quick thumbs while the prime rib rested and the potatoes held their heat. Nat King Cole drifted through the rooms like an old friend who knows when to speak and when to listen. I was slicing the first roast when Patricia touched my sleeve with 2 fingers. She did not speak. She tipped her phone toward me so the screen faced up. On her post, under the photo where I stood laughing with my brother, a new comment had landed like a stone. "Must be nice to throw parties with money that doesn't belong to you. Some people forget who helped them get where they are." Under the words was my daughter's name. The knife felt heavier in my hand. The room did not tilt, and my breath did not run. I looked at Patricia, then at the screen, then back at the meat. "Leave it," I said. "Let the comments sit in daylight." Patricia searched my face, then nodded once. I plated the slices, carried the platter to the table, and reminded myself that shadows do not own the sun. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. We ate, we passed bowls and baskets. Mark told the story of the year his car died on the way to the mountains, and we spent the weekend in a motel eating pie and playing cards. Linda described the time she painted a living room the wrong white and only noticed when the sun came out. Robert told a story I had forgotten about me buying a used truck for a man who was too proud to ask. Each story felt like a hand on my back. Each story pushed me another inch toward the man I had been before I let fear take my chair. The wine opened, the room loosened, the house felt answered. My phone buzzed on the table, my daughter's name glowed through the glass. I let it ring once. It rang again. The 3rd time, I stepped into the study and closed the door. Her voice came hot. She had seen the photos. She said I was selfish and cruel, that I was showing off, that I had humiliated her. I listened until she ran out of breath. Then I said one sentence, calm and even. "You told me not to come. I made other plans." She said the money for this house was hers by right. I told her the house was mine, bought with proceeds she had never earned. She threatened to come over and make a scene. I told her I would not fight on the phone. I ended the call and let the quiet return. I stood there with the phone in my hand and felt 2 feelings trying to share the same space: sorrow and relief. The sorrow came first, like always. Then relief arrived, sure-footed, and did not apologize. I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked back to the table. I lifted my glass and spoke one sentence about gratitude. People smiled. The moment held. We ate. We told more stories. For a while, the night belonged wholly to us. The pounding at the door knocked the room out of the soft key it had found. It was not a knock. It was an order. I stood and walked to the foyer. Through the glass, I saw my daughter's face tight with anger, Cody a half step behind her. I opened the door because I'm not a man who shouts through wood. She pushed past me and launched her words into the hall. She called me a liar and said I had been hiding money and stealing from family accounts. I asked her to lower her voice and step into the study. She refused. She pointed at the photos on the mantel and said Mary would be ashamed of me. I felt my jaw tighten, then loosen. Cody tried to soften things. He said they felt left out, that if I had told them about the house, none of this would be happening. I told him I had no duty to report my life like a filing. Respect is not a dividend you can demand. My daughter pulled out her phone and started tapping. Cody asked her to pause. She did not. She said if I did not listen, someone else would. 10 minutes later, red and blue brushed the front windows. A measured knock came. 2 officers stood on the stoop, one older, one young. The older one, his badge reading Martinez, asked if there had been a disturbance. I told him we were having dinner. He asked if anyone had been threatened or restrained. No. He asked if I wanted anyone removed. I told him I wanted peace and for my guests to enjoy their meal. He asked if we could speak privately. I led him to the study. He listened. When we returned, the younger officer, Norman, stood near my daughter. She told him I had stolen marital funds and that the villa was purchased with money she had a right to claim. He asked if she had documentation. She did not. Sergeant Martinez asked who owned the home. I said I did. He asked if I had documents. I said yes. I went to the study, opened the wall safe, and brought out a leather folder. I laid it open on the dining table in the presence of my guests and the officers. There were investment statements with dates and numbers, tax filings, and wire receipts. There was an email from the bank confirming a freeze on outward transfers from the savings account ending in 3491, $400,000 secured, any transfer requiring my in-person authorization for 30 days. There were the signed trust papers, the will, and the health care directives. I showed the deed and the closing statement for the villa. I spoke quietly, one fact at a time, as if reading a grocery list. The facts were enough. Tom told the officers he had invested with me and watched me do the work. Linda added that she had reviewed my sale documents the year I exited my last stake and that the proceeds were mine, clean and taxed. Patricia said the only thing she had posted was a photo of friends at a table. Mark said he had known me long enough to know the difference between boasting and gratitude, and that what he saw tonight was gratitude. Robert stood beside me without speaking, the way brothers do when no words will help. Sergeant Martinez turned to my daughter and explained the obvious in a voice that carried authority without heat. "This is your father's home. He may host guests. He has provided documents that support ownership and lawful purchase. There is no cause for us to intervene beyond keeping the peace." He suggested she move her car and allow the evening to conclude. My daughter's face moved through rage, panic, and calculation. She tried a new angle. She said I had promised her support. She said families do not keep secrets. She said I owed her transparency. I told her I owed her love and honesty and limits, which I was giving now. She said she would see me in court. I told her the court was made for clarity and that I was not afraid of clarity. While they considered what they had just heard, I felt the usefulness of the day before settle around me. The calls to the bank, the freeze on the $400,000, the signatures on the trust. All of it had seemed like paperwork at a desk. Tonight, it became a shield you could touch. Even that comment on Patricia's post had helped me see the shape of the fight. Not just pride, control, not just anger. Access. Naming it calmed me. I stood straighter because I could name what I would no longer fund. Then something inside her collapsed. Not remorse, not yet. Something more fragile, the belief that I would always fold. She searched the room for a friendly face and found none. Cody stared at the floor. His voice was small when he said they should go. She ignored him and turned back to Sergeant Martinez and insisted again that he force me to include her. He told her the law does not enforce invitations. He told her the law guards doors and property, not pride. Her shoulders dropped. The red drained from her cheeks. The older anger gave way to a younger fear. For a second, I saw the girl who used to fall asleep in the back seat after a long drive. Then she shut it down, turned on her heel, and walked for the door. I followed because I wanted the night to stay human to the end. At the threshold, she called me a coward. She said I had chosen strangers over family. I told her I had chosen respect over control. I told her I had chosen to stop paying for my own erasure. She said everyone would know what kind of man I really was. I told her they already did. Cody met my eyes and said he was sorry. He said he had not wanted it like this. I told him I hoped he would find steady ground and that shouting would not show him where it was. The officers thanked me for my patience. I thanked them for theirs. They left, and the door clicked shut with that clean sound a house makes when the draft has nowhere else to go. I returned to the table. The room held a respectful quiet, not awkward, and not pitying. Robert raised his glass, and so did I. I said one sentence, steady and plain. They thought I was weak. Now they see the consequences. Hearts eased, forks moved. The conversation did not pretend that nothing had happened. It simply refused to be defined by it. We ate the rest of the meal not as if a storm had passed, but as if we had learned how to stand in weather without losing our footing. After dinner, I brought the leather folder back and let my friends see whatever they wished to see. Not to boast, not to convince them of anything, but to let truth stand in a chair where lies had just tried to sit. The statements were dull in the way honest numbers are dull. The freeze notice was clear, printed in neat black type. The trust papers were crisp with new signatures. The deed had weight. The wire confirmations read like a metronome. Nobody needed me to read every line. Nobody needed persuasion. They needed only to know that I had acted and that the actions would hold when the room was empty. The night did not return to the exact tone it had before the pounding on the door. It did something better. It deepened. Conversation moved with more care, like people crossing a river on flat stones. We spoke about holidays that go wrong and how sometimes that is the only path to the right one. We spoke about the cost of letting other people decide your worth and the quiet miracle of deciding it yourself. Mark said he admired how calm I had stayed. I told him calm is easier when the floor under you is made of decisions instead of wishes. Linda said the house looked even more beautiful now that it had seen the truth. Patricia squeezed my hand and said, "Courage looks good on me." Robert said very little. He did not have to. At the end of the evening, coats came off hooks, arms found sleeves, and the door saw friends out into the cold. Patricia touched my arm and asked if I wanted her to take the photo down or delete the comment. I told her to leave both alone. Light should not hide because a shadow shows up at noon. She nodded and kissed my cheek. Tom left a bottle on the counter with a note that said, "Save this for New Year's." Linda put the dish towels in a neat stack, the way Mary used to. Sarah Henderson told a joke so gentle it left the air warmer. The last taillights disappeared past the hedge, and quiet returned, not empty, not thin, but full. I walked to the study and opened the safe one more time. I slid the leather folder back into its place and locked the door with a steady turn. I took out the small note I had written that morning and read it in the lamplight. They think I am weak, but they are wrong. They think I need permission, but I do not. Under those lines, I added a third sentence. Tonight proved it. I put the note away and turned off the lamp. The room let me go. I stepped onto the terrace and let the cold find my face. The neighborhood had settled into that late-hour quiet that feels almost like forgiveness. A train loads somewhere far off, part sorrow, part invitation. I held the railing and looked through the glass at my own reflection, a man standing straighter than he has in years, a man who knows the cost of his peace and is willing to pay it. I said the words out loud so I could hear them in the air instead of only in thought. I have lived in fear for 30 years, but tonight I took my life back. The sentence did not echo. It did not need to. It landed where it belonged and stayed. Inside, I washed the silver by hand and laid each piece to dry on a towel, the way Mary taught me. I blew out the candles one by one and watched a thin thread of smoke rise from each glass cup. I turned off the stereo, and the house, as if grateful, sighed. In the front hall, I looked once more at the spot where my daughter had stood. I did not feel triumphant. I felt something stronger. Clarity, the kind that does not need to be loud to be true. Before bed, I sat at the desk and wrote a brief letter to myself, dated and signed. It said what needed saying in plain words. I am not a wallet with a heartbeat. I am a man with a name, a door, and a table. I choose who sits at that table. I folded the page and tucked it into the estate folder with the others. I wrote a second note to my attorney authorizing certified copies for my safe deposit box and a scan for my records. I sealed the envelope and put it with my keys. Action invites rest. Rest invites strength. Sleep came quickly. Dawn came clean. I walked the rooms and felt the peace hold. I brewed coffee and carried the mug to the window, where the lawn looked like a fresh page. I thought about what would come next. Not drama, not apology tours. Action, clean, quiet action. I would place the new documents in the box after Christmas, I would send a short note to my daughter, not to fight, but to state facts. The accounts are secure, the trust is active, the dinner is mine to host. The door is mine to open and close. I stood there until the coffee cooled and the light made its slow climb up the wall. Then I nodded to no one and said the words I needed to hear. Forward. Feeling unseen and used is hard, isn't it? If you believe every person deserves to be seen and worthy and that justice matters, type the word "prove" in the comments. Now watch what I do to change it and how the next steps will unfold. The morning after the storm in my villa, I woke to a silence that felt different. It was not the silence of loneliness or the silence of a house still trying to understand who belonged inside. It was the silence of clarity. The documents were signed, the bank had locked the doors I told them to lock, and the officers had left the night before, with nothing more to do. I brewed my coffee and walked the length of the terrace, letting the winter air sting my face. For the first time in 30 years, I felt that the ground under my feet belonged to me, not to anyone else's expectations. The phone buzzed before I even finished the mug. It was a text from Patricia, a simple line that said, "You handled it with grace." I looked at the words for a long time before setting the phone down. Grace? That was not a word I would have chosen for myself. I had been angry, yes, and humiliated, yes, but in the end, I had not raised my voice. I had raised my truth. And the truth had stood on its own legs, stronger than shouting. Later that day, I called my attorney again. We finalized the transfer of part of my liquid assets into the new trust and added a clause that would direct $200,000 to a scholarship in Mary's name. I told him it should go to kids in our town who wanted to study nursing, because Mary had always admired nurses, the quiet strength they carried from room to room. When I signed that page, I felt something lift. It was not revenge. It was completion. It was saying to the world, what I built will live on with dignity, not with manipulation. Meanwhile, word about the scene at the villa traveled fast. Friends called me to say they supported me. Old acquaintances, people I had not heard from in years, sent me messages saying they admired my composure. And Brianna and Cody, well, the calls that came from their end carried a very different tune. Cody's brother told me they had been forced to move out of the large home I had helped them buy. Without my constant financial support, the mortgage payments swallowed them. They rented a small 2-bedroom apartment near the freeway, the kind of place where traffic hums all night and sunlight fights its way through thin blinds. Their friends, the ones who had enjoyed weekends by their pool and dinners paid for with my checks, stopped calling. People can smell desperation, and desperation is a smell that empties rooms. I thought of them often, not with glee, but with a sadness that felt like a bruise. They had traded love for leverage, and leverage does not last. Brianna must have believed that humiliating me publicly would bend me back into line. Instead, her words now hung online like wet laundry no one wanted to claim. The comment under Patricia's photo stayed there for everyone to see. It had not hurt me. It had exposed her. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. For myself, I kept living. I began to walk every morning in the park near the villa. I bought a simple wooden bench with my own money and had it placed under a row of oaks with a small plaque that read, "For Mary, who believed in ordinary grace." I would sit there some mornings, coffee in hand, and watch children chase each other down the path. Sometimes I would talk to her softly, the way I used to when the lights were out, and we lay in bed listening to the hum of the old refrigerator. I told her I was trying. I told her I was learning that love and boundaries are not enemies. She never answered, but the quiet always did. One afternoon, as I sorted through papers in my study, the phone rang again. Brianna. I let it buzz until it clicked to voicemail. Minutes later, her voice poured out in a rush. She said she was sorry for how things looked. She said stress had gotten to her. She said she wanted to start fresh. But even in her apology, the words bent back toward money. She mentioned needing help with the deposit for their new apartment, needing something to get back on their feet. I sat at the desk with the leather folder open in front of me and listened without moving. When the message ended, I deleted it. I did not call back. That act, simply pressing delete, felt larger than any court victory. It was not anger. It was self-respect. I whispered into the empty room, "I don't need them anymore. I have myself." The words carried the weight of 30 years. They carried the freedom of 30 more. I spent the following weeks turning the villa into a home. I hung photographs of Mary in the hallway, not as reminders of grief, but as anchors of love. I invited friends over for Sunday dinners that were smaller, simpler, and filled with laughter that did not ask me to pay for it. I finished setting up the scholarship fund, and when I received the first thank you letter from a high school senior who had been awarded the aid, I sat in my chair with tears running down my cheeks. It felt like Mary had smiled. Brianna and Cody, on the other hand, slipped further. I heard through neighbors that Cody's contracting jobs dried up once people saw the police at my house. He tried to explain, but reputation is a fragile thing. Brianna withdrew from her social circle. She had been the one always posting photos of dinners, vacations, and designer clothes. Now her silence was louder than her bragging had ever been. The friends who once envied her were nowhere to be found. They lived in their small apartment, a far cry from the house they had believed was the beginning of their empire. And me, I breathed, I gardened, I read books I had not touched in years. I sat on the terrace with a glass of wine and watched the sky turn from gold to navy, and I did not feel guilty. I did not feel like a thief in my own life. I felt like a man who had finally drawn a line and stood on the right side of it. The lesson crystallized in me one night as I wrote in my journal. Parents must love their children, but love is not the same as surrender. Love without boundaries becomes servitude. Children must respect their parents, but respect is not the same as entitlement. And in this modern world, where greed can dress itself up as family duty, the only real defense is dignity. Dignity is a currency no one can counterfeit. Dignity is what keeps you human when money tries to make you a machine. I thought of all the years I had believed that giving more would fix everything. More tuition checks, more down payments, more loans disguised as gifts. All it had done was feed a hunger that never learned satisfaction. Now, with every day that passed, I learned that sometimes the most loving word is no. I ended that journal entry with one line. My life from this point will be chosen by me. It felt like a declaration. It felt like a vow. The calls from Brianna continued for a while, some angry, some pleading, some even pretending to be casual. I let them all go to voicemail. Once she left a message saying she had seen the scholarship announcement and that it was a sweet gesture, but family should come first. I almost laughed. Family had come first for 30 years. And what had it given me? Emptiness, silence, being treated like a wallet with a pulse. Now I was given first to integrity. If she could not respect that, then there was nothing left for us to talk about. I closed that chapter by blocking her number. The silence that followed was clean. It was not the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of peace. Sometimes, when I walked in the park and sat on Mary's bench, I thought of Brianna. I thought of the girl she had been, the woman she had become, and the choices that had brought us here. I did not hate her. I did not even wish her ill. I wished her clarity, the same clarity I had finally found. But clarity cannot be given. It must be chosen. And so the villa became more than a house. It became a witness. It saw me invite people who respected me. It saw me honor my wife's memory with action instead of sorrow. It saw me delete messages that once would have ruled me. It saw me cook, laugh, read, and sleep without fear that someone would knock at the door with open hands and closed hearts. One evening, as I stood on the terrace with the city lights flickering beyond the hills, I whispered the words I had come to live by. I am free. I am worthy. and I will never give that away again. That was my victory. That was my peace. And as the year turned, I began to think of something new. Perhaps joining a local charity, volunteering, or building something that had nothing to do with bloodlines and everything to do with values. The world still held open doors. I would choose carefully which ones to walk through, because this life, my life, was mine again. And I intended to live it. I wake each morning now with a peace I had almost forgotten could exist. The weight that once pressed on my chest, the endless requests, the guilt, the disappointment, has lifted. My new home is quiet but alive, filled not with demands but with small joys that grow each day. The villa, once only walls and space, has become a sanctuary. The rooms echo not with shouts or accusations, but with the soft sound of music, the smell of coffee brewing, and the laughter of friends who stop by because they want to, not because they need something from me. I keep the doors open for those who bring kindness. I no longer confuse blood with loyalty. In the weeks after the chaos, I joined a community group that meets every Tuesday at the town center. We share meals, stories, and ideas for projects that help those who have less. Some of them knew my wife, Mary, years ago. They tell me she always had a way of making people feel seen. Sitting at those tables, I feel her presence again. I tell myself that maybe I am only now learning to honor her spirit properly. I signed up to volunteer at the food pantry, stocking shelves and handing out bags. It may sound small, but handing a bag of rice or milk to someone who looks at you with gratitude fills a part of the soul that money never could. I also started traveling, not far at first, small trips to the coast, to see the ocean Mary loved, then to the mountains where the air feels crisp and forgiving. Standing by the waves, I whispered, "Mary, I think I finally understand. Freedom is not what you buy. It's what you keep inside when the noise outside tries to drown it out." The trips reminded me that the world was larger than the little prison of manipulation I had lived in for decades. Meanwhile, Brianna tried to reach me again, this time not with calls, but with a letter. I found it in my mailbox one morning, the handwriting shaky, as if she had written quickly, maybe even through tears. She said she was sorry, that she regretted her words, that she knew she had hurt me. She asked for forgiveness. But then, almost as if she could not help herself, she added a line about hoping we might work together again financially. That sentence poisoned the rest of the page. I folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it in the drawer of my desk. I did not reply. Forgiveness can live quietly in the heart, but reconciliation requires trust. And trust, once burned to ashes, does not return with ink on paper. I learned later that Cody had taken a job again, some contracting work in a nearby town. They were living in a cramped apartment, far from the life of luxury they once boasted about online. Friends who had once cheered their every photo no longer lingered around them. They had been left with each other, and perhaps that is a lesson enough. I do not gloat over their hardship, but I also do not rescue them. That chapter is closed. Then one morning, a different envelope arrived. This one was from a student, a young woman named Hannah. She had been the first recipient of the scholarship fund I created in Mary's name. The letter was handwritten, every curve of ink filled with sincerity. She wrote, "Thank you, Mr. Collins. You changed my life. I can now attend nursing school without the crushing weight of debt. You honored your wife's name, and I will carry it with me as I learn to heal others." I held that card in my hands for a long while, tears filling my eyes. That single letter outweighed every betrayal. It told me that the legacy of love and sacrifice could live on, even when family fails. That night I sat by the fire in the villa and thought about everything. Parents, I realized, must learn to love without erasing themselves. Our love for our children cannot be an open vault that empties us. We must teach them boundaries, not just give them comforts. That is the real inheritance. For the children, the lesson is sharper still. Respect is the true currency between generations. To see your parents only as a source of money is to blind yourself to the treasure of their lives, their stories, their love. And for the world as a whole, this modern world of greed and constant wanting, it shows me how fragile character can be. People chase wealth, but without dignity, it leaves them hollow. Dignity is the only asset that can never be taken, never be stolen, never be spent on nothing. One evening at a community event, an old neighbor approached me. She said, "You look lighter, Harold, like someone who has finally put down a heavy bag." I smiled and told her, "That's exactly what I did, and I don't plan on picking it up again." Saying it aloud gave me strength. I felt as if the truth was carving new paths inside me. The days have grown gentle. I host small dinners with friends who bring casseroles and stories instead of bills and requests. We sit under the soft light in my dining room, raising glasses not to flaunt wealth, but to celebrate survival, resilience, and freedom. I walk in the park every morning and sit on the bench I placed for Mary. The plaque still shines. For Mary, who believed in ordinary grace. Sometimes I touch the metal with my fingertips and whisper, "I'm doing it, Mary. I'm finally living. I no longer fear the phone ringing. I no longer dread the knock on the door. If it is Brianna again, I let it go unanswered. If it is Cody, I let him face his own road. My story no longer bends around theirs. It belongs to me. My rangioi, my boundary, is drawn, and it will not be crossed again." The other day, as the sun was setting, I stood on the balcony of the villa. The horizon burned orange, then softened into purple. A breeze carried the faint sound of children laughing from the park nearby. I closed my eyes and let it sink into me. This was life. This was mine. I whispered, "I finally found where I belong." I know now that betrayal does not define the end of a life. It defines the beginning of understanding. And with that understanding, I walk forward lighter, stronger, and unafraid. The story has come to an end. It has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.